Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Virtuoso. This is Matthew Upchurch, Mr. Matthew Upchurch,
Hi, thank
CEO
you.
and founder of Virtuoso.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just watching that video reminds me of the grueling hours. It's grueling to be there. And Jenny, one of my colleagues, is in the group. She knows when she had to do the 3 days meetings with a broken foot on the wheelchair.
There's a lot of walking. That's hard.
Right.
I miss the hugs though. Yeah.
I know. A virtual hug. Hug, everybody. It's travel industry, get used to it. It's a very huggy industry.
Yeah.
People are in this industry because they love being with people. And making other people happy makes themselves happy, right? So today, this conversation with Matthew, I'm going to start with one of the first questions. It's a quote from Matthew, which I personally love and completely agree. And he famously coined this phrase: automate the predictable and humanize the exceptional. 把可预见的事情自动化，但是杰出的体验一定要人性化。This, to me, underscores the entire essence of what we do in custom travel, in high-end, high-touch point travel, right? So Matthew, could you tell us how you came up with this phrase? And in particular, it would be really helpful for the audience if you describe for us back when you came up with the phrase, what was the industry like? And how did you see this was going to be the case?
Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me. It's a lot of fun. I cannot wait to get back to China. When Irene opened up the office in Shanghai and we were there, the energy that was there was just amazing, and I can't wait to get back. You know, it's really interesting. I actually didn't say this to you, May, but at 7 a.m. it's 10 p.m. here in Texas.
I know.
At 7 a.m. this morning, I had a meeting with one of the new heads of Belmont. And as you know, Belmont is now owned by LVMH.
Yeah.
And it's very funny that you're asking me this as the first question, because I did a meeting with two of the most senior people from LVMH last November in London. And I told them the same quote. And today they made a whole presentation around how they took that quote and made it the pillar of their strategy going forward. So twice in one day, I've been asked the question at 7 a.m. and at 10 p.m. the same day. But here's how I explain it. I've always loved technology. Since I was a little boy, I've been doing, all the different, I always loved technology. But there's two kinds of technology. The technology that is primarily designed to remove the human being to make it more efficient, right? And then there's the technology that is designed to enhance the human being, to allow the human being to spend more time and more effort to be human, to be that thing that's different. So the original idea behind it was, how can we use technology to help remove those things that take a lot of time to do, or things that are, that I don't want to spend a lot of time, so that I can spend more time interacting or doing things. So that was the original piece. But now what's interesting is that, and we're doing it right here. In 2019, I literally said from Virtuoso Travel Week main stage, I said, a lot of times we spend a lot of time focusing on the technology that can replace us and worry about that. I said, but the other side of this is, What about the technology that can amplify us, that can help us connect more deeply? And it's very funny because the one technology that I told everybody they should really pay more attention to was this video conferencing. I installed my first video conferencing system in 1997, and it was very, very slow and not very good. We installed Zoom 4 years ago. The science is out there that communication, only 7% of communication is the actual word. Then you have the tone, you have the body language, you have facial expressions, all these things that connect human beings together. And so for me, it's always been a passion to figure out how can we help, how can we apply technology? And so it's evolved over time as it became more of a utilitarian quote. And now it's more of an amplification quote, right? It used to be like, help me make sure I spend less time doing things that are repetitive or simple things that a computer can do. Mm-hmm. But as it's evolved over the decades, it's now become more about what, yes, we want to do that, but also how can it allow us to create better human connection, right? And for example, one of the things that has been happening over time is co-selling, right? So more and more advisors around the world, they get to a certain point and they might get somebody and they say, well, let's do a three-way Zoom, right? And you're talking to somebody in South Africa or somebody in, here or there or whatever, and they're talking together. So that was the original, I just have a real passion for the technology that can actually help us be more human.
See, that is a surprise to a lot of people. I mean, I know you, Matthew. I remember walking into one of your Zoom meetings like 3 years ago and bumped into other people in your Zoom room.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit surprised because you adopted this technology, like you said, way before the rest of us did. But anybody going to Virtuoso Travel Week in Las Vegas, you'd be surprised. How many people are we up to now? 7,000?
We were about 6,500.
Yeah, 6,500 people. And we're doing speed dating. Speed dating, 4 minutes each. And somehow you manage 6,500 people with a precise 4-minute schedule for every single person. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of technology behind. Otherwise, you'll have people bumping into each other in the hallway.
Yeah.
And yet, so in some ways, you practically use your own quote. You use technology, automated all of that. Right. And focus the 4 minutes on one-on-one exchanges.
Right.
Now,
and the other thing that happened, the other thing that happened is that also when we did the virtual, that's when we did the virtual Virtuoso Travel Week this past year. It was so successful because so many people had invested so many years and so many times of getting to know each other physically. And so that's something else that we're going to hear a lot more about is hybrid, right? And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Right. But I want to sort of probe this idea of humanize the exceptional a little bit about, I guess that leads to the next question. It is your way of looking at travel design and travel advisory. Right. You really, once you made an analogy, you said investment bankers manage your money, but travel designers manage your time, which is in fact more precious than money.
Right.
Right.
Well, two things. Let me. That's also one of my. I love that you're asking me some of my favorite concepts because they're wonderful. I do want to say one other thing about exceptional that I think is important and I think sometimes gets lost. When you say automate the predictive and humanize the exceptional, normally and correctly so, when you think exceptional, you think wonderful, you think made me feel great, right? It's about how you make something even better. But sometimes we also forget that exceptional means when something goes wrong. And when something goes wrong, it is a proven fact that some of the best loyalty in the service sector, specifically in travel, is not created when everything went right, but when something went wrong and it was fixed really well, right? Because and so one of the things I always like to remind everybody is that exceptional is, wow, I had a great experience, but exceptional is also like, it's travel. Things are going to go wrong. Something's going to happen. And this is where humanity, this is where the human touch, a computer just can't say sorry and fix the problem the way a human being can and make you feel like you cared, you took care of it, you listened, right? And so I think that's an important reminder that exceptional is not only about what goes right, it's also when things go wrong. And a lot of times when something goes wrong and you fix it really well, it actually creates more loyalty than if everything went right.
Thank you. Thank you. Allow me to just rephrase this in Chinese because I think it's so important. 我觉得刚才就是 Matthew 讲的这个概念，对我个人来讲都是非常有帮助的，所以我打断他一下，我用中文给大家讲一下他刚才的意思，对吧？因为刚才说的是杰出的体验要人性化，这个杰出 exceptional 这个英文词儿，通常大家都是想着你把我带到马尔代夫特别漂亮的岛上去度假了，什么东西你给我一个最美的假期了。但是这个 exceptional 的时候，有时候是解决问题。客人在路上旅行总是会遇到各种各样的问题的。真正这些职业的旅行旅行叫什么设计师或者是 travel advisor， 他们不仅仅是把好的东西给你，是在你遇到问题的时候特别善于解决问题。其实人遇到问题的时候，很多时候他有一种情感的。叫情感比较难受，但你有一个人在隔壁说 OK 我明白这个事情，对不起我来帮你解决，然后你很快把这个事情解决了，就在客人遇到危机的时候你能够拉着他的手带他度过这个难关，这也是 exceptional 的一方面。That was brilliant, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And now to your question about travel advisors and investment bankers, really more investment, I would say more wealth advisors, right? More than investment bankers. So the point that I've always made is the profession of travel designer, travel advisor has really changed. We live in a world, and my gosh, China is the ultimate, everything can be done online. There isn't anything that can't be done online, right?
Yep.
So the reality is that in a world where everything can be done online, everything can be done direct, what's really important is what are we really, what is a travel advisor? Yes, we have to book, but to this day with my wealth advisor, it's the same thing as travel. With my wealth advisor, I still argue with my wealth advisor who is a better chooser of stocks, right? And sometimes I win and sometimes they win. But I tell you what I don't argue with them about. What I don't argue is about the total experience of how dealing with the wealth advisor gives me a sense of having a more conscious plan about not just being about having something that because I have a plan, because I have a thought, because I have a collaborator, it's more fun. It's more, if I find out about something, the old idea of a travel advisor or travel agent is that the customer didn't have any knowledge. The customer has lots of knowledge, but it's how you collaborate. It's bringing what they bring and whatever. And so the travel advisor has now become overall, the profession has been evolving into how do I add value before the trip, during the trip, and after the trip. And it's the after the trip that's very important because it becomes a learning relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The data that we have from clients all over the world is that the conversation after the trip is actually the most important thing that differentiates a transactional travel agent from a travel advisor. Because once it becomes a learning experience, and then I demonstrate that the next time I go on a trip, what you learned about me makes the next trip a little bit better. You bring me better choices, you make me better connections, etc. Then what happens is the client is investing in that learning relationship.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's harder for that client to go somewhere else because you keep getting better. But as far as the analogy to a wealth advisor, the specific quote that I've used many, many years is, why do people go to a wealth advisor to have a conscious strategy to help optimize money, assets? Why don't they collaborate with somebody to help them optimize their most valuable, non-renewable asset, their free leisure time?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happening and what's been happening over the years is the clients that really get to have that kind of relationship, you start to have, you start with very easy steps, like when people come back from a trip, what did you like, whatever. And by the way, a lot of times the right question when somebody comes back from a trip isn't, did you like the trip? Because there's a lot of, depending on the personality of the person, a lot of people, some people may be perfectly comfortable telling you what they liked or didn't like. Some people don't. A better question that opens up the possibilities is to say, if there was one thing about that trip that you would do differently, what would it be? It's a much safer question. It's a much more specific question. So it opens up a much more productive conversation that becomes built on it. And then when you start having those conversations, that's when you start putting in, well, 2 years from now, your children will be the perfect ages to go to Africa, right?
Yeah.
You start putting in little ideas, and that's the way you start. But eventually, more and more advisors are starting to work with their clients around the idea of, let's not just react. Let's have a little bit of a vision of where, what are the right ages for your kid? What are the right times to do this, et cetera, and have more of an opportunity to have a strategy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. One thing that struck me was when you said in the past that the lack of balance of information between the travel agents and travelers tend to be that travel agents have more travel information and they think the travelers are not well informed. Right now in China, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
The travelers themselves think, oh, I have everything. I know what's best. I know which destination I should go, which hotel I should stay. And so they've driven and they have money, and it's hard because we work in travel most of the time. We don't have so much money. And so when you are at this end, you're put in a position. I find many Chinese travel advisors not looking at clients condescendingly, thinking I'm more knowledgeable. Instead, a little bit up, and lack of sense of confidence, and a little bit like acting as a secretary, being pushed around and say, book me this flight, to get me that seat.
Right.
90% of Chinese travel advisors work that way.
Right. And by the way, don't feel bad, because that's the way it was everywhere. That's the way it was everywhere. And it does take time. There are a couple of things that you do. First of all, first of all, in today's, information world, if you tell a customer that you know everything, and that whatever, it's not even, there's a lot of things I can do. I've always said I can have that role of helping you book and make that things, but the evolution of that conversation has been, sure, you can have a guide, but you don't have my guide. You don't have the people that I know. So I know that in Chinese culture, I was born in Mexico, it's this whole idea about, what's one of the things that our parents always taught us. It's not just what you know, it's who you know. So one of the things that's very important is, and this goes back to this whole idea about building relationships and building whatever. I have somebody in Istanbul, I have somebody here, et cetera. We can do those things. So it's about talking about the people. And what happens over time is that when that client walks into a hotel and they're greeted by the GM, or they're greeted because they're part of Virtuoso, right? And here's the other thing. The Virtuoso advisor, make the booking however you want to make it. But then we always tell it, send an email or send something to the hotel, because every single Virtuoso property, for example, has a Virtuoso liaison, a contact. Mm-hmm. And if you make that effort, a lot of times they will greet the client, do something. And it's about starting to build that personal connection and about being able to establish, which is why we spend so much time with networking and education and all these kinds of things. And the other thing that I think is important is also, I've always said that the evolution from, and it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's not like this happened, like everybody just woke up, in other parts of the world and it was just that way. But I think that's what we're trying to accomplish as Virtuoso expands around the world, and with all the wonderful growth we have in China. It's about the fact that a Virtuoso advisor has the advantage that, your other Virtuoso colleagues around the world have a reputation, right? Mm-hmm. And that reputation transfers because you have a Brazilian colleague, right, who's in the same shoes. You have somebody in the UK, you have somebody in Australia, you have somebody all over. And it's about that human connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, actually, I would love for you, Matthew, to talk a little bit why you champion such an old-fashioned networking style in Las Vegas in the age of AI, right? And achieving such an incredible following.
Well, and by the way, in Las Vegas is obviously the biggest one, but actually, we've all been loving the fact that we've actually been seeing our membership in China actually have face-to-face meetings when the rest of us can't. So that's been so we have been getting joy watching our members. It's for one very simple reason. I said in one of my speeches a few years ago, I said, with the pressure with the pressure of commoditization on everything all the time, right? One of the few things that allow us to maintain, a margin and whatever is how you make people feel. And how you make people feel also starts with the way people feel about you. So every time you build a relationship, the reason we do that speed dating and the reason we do all that is because I'm full of these sayings I've said over all these years, but my saying, and maybe you could say it in Chinese because it's, maybe it translates well, I don't know, but you can't take the human out of humanity, right? And so when you spend time getting to know people and then they receive your customer, right? Even if it's a Zoom, whatever, there's just something about that transfers.
Absolutely. I really want to say this in Chinese again. 我们刚才可能他说话比较快一些哈，如果同学们听起来有点困难的话呢，欢迎你在那个聊天框里头打进去，我随时可以停下来，就是来诠释他在讲的一些理念。 他刚才讲的很重要的一个理念就是，你作为一个旅行设计师，你其实就是把这个人性里面的这个人性保留在那里，因为你送一个客人去到什么地方，你希望对方酒店也好，对方的导游也好，对你的客人特别特别的好。那起点是在你是怎么对对方的。所以人和人之间的关系是一个环形的。他为什么在拉斯维加斯和全世界其他好多地方，他们做这个 Virtuoso 的这些what do you call those when you are in market travel week Australia travel week yeah， 他们在澳洲也有，南美洲也好，有一周一周的时间，都是这种把供货商和买方都拉到一起来见面的这些见面会。它就是让你建立一个人的关系。我觉得我们在中国有时候忙着订客户的时候，觉得哎呀，我给你客户，我是买家，我是老大。这种态度往往会影响别人对你的看法，那别人对你的客户肯定也就会有一些看法，是吧？所以呢，这个人和人之间的关系是一个循环的。I wanted to say that in Chinese, Matthew, because in particular, I think working with China market, the biggest challenge is that our clients are very pushy and short on lead time in planning, and they're demanding, they want this thing off on your fingertip all the time. And so our travel designers in China are very often under a lot of time pressure to perform. And so they turn around and then send this request. If you don't answer back to me within the day, I'll switch to another person. If your price is too high, I switch to another person. I don't even tell you.
Yeah.
So the burnout or the churn of your supplier resource is incredible. And sometimes it hurts me. I go like, oh my God, it took me years to build this relationship and it's burned overnight with one rude email.
Yeah.
Right?
But also, I also think that, I also, maybe I'm naive, but I also think that it's in Brazil, for example, we joke in Brazil and in Mexico that 24 hours is long-term planning, So you're not the only place in the world that has that, but it's very interesting because it also takes a little bit of time sometimes for the client to start feeling the difference, that when they did something with a little bit of notice, with a little bit of personal touch, whatever, the experience is better. So it doesn't happen overnight, but it is something that's worth striving for, right?
Which side is likely to make the change first? Is it the clients who will change, or is it the suppliers would speed up?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, one of the things that we also believe in is co-creation, right? How do we collaborate to better understand? Which is why we launched our China Smart series, because what we wanted to do with China Smart was we wanted the Virtuoso suppliers that really were committed to understanding the Chinese market to listen specifically from the Chinese advisors, right? In other words, it's like, tell us, learning. And I go back to, look, and here's what's going to happen. There's going to be suppliers that the supplier itself overall doesn't really get it, but they have people in there that do get it, and they kind of help you work the system.
Yeah.
Right? You have some suppliers that don't get it at all and don't have people that get it, and you just basically have to treat it a little bit like a commodity. And then there are those suppliers, and it's interesting to be able to share that today because it literally happened this morning at 7 a.m. But when the head of strategy of Belmond, talking about automate to predict, humanize, and center, he said it was absolutely fascinating. You know what they presented on the slide to me? They called it the guest and the customer. And I said, guest and customer.
Isn't that the same person?
No. At Belmond, they have made a decision that the customer is the travel advisor. And the guest is the person who stays at the hotel. They are rolling out a new strategy to empower their business development force, their commercial operation, to be able to deal with advisors because they've understood the value of an advisor to be able to have those kind of conversations and enhance. So I think that's an interesting move.
That's very interesting. For those who are not familiar, 对 Virtuoso 的这些用词儿不熟悉的哈，他说 advisor 的时候 ，advisor 就是一个旅行设计师，但是呢，他不是那个住店的客人，所以现在有越来越多的，因为 Virtuoso 平台上很多的是旅行设计师。所以有越来像他举的这个例子 ，Belmont 这个酒店，他们现在的策略就是，我不仅仅要照顾好住店的客人，我也要照顾好这些 advisor， 这些是他的 client。Yeah. Moving on to, actually, it is this year. Just one last question on the Virtuoso format. Do you think the format will change 2021? Are we gonna be back in Las Vegas?
We're trying, because we had people from over 110 countries, right, coming in. We're probably going to make a decision sometime in probably late February, early March.
Yeah.
We will definitely have, I mean, there's no question. There was some really, we did a lot of really good stuff with the virtual. I mean, the Virtuoso Travel Week was very successful. But I think that what you're going to see now is an evolution of hybrid. So what do you do? What can you do physically? And then what do you do, on a virtual basis? Yeah, exactly. So we actually do have some, Irene and the team have been doing some versions of Virtuoso Travel Week in China. So yeah. I do hope that someday we'll have one that's, even bigger in China than it is anywhere else in the world. So
you will. That day's coming. I can see it.
But I wanted to share. I wanted to share one other thing about this. I ended up, because of COVID and all this, but last year I had a secret project that I was testing. And I was trying to get it ready for what would have been 2020 Virtuoso. So actually it was 2019 Virtuoso. I had these artists and scientists, some of who had worked for Industrial Light and Magic. So that's the company that does Star Wars and, all the Hollywood stuff. But we actually were developing a project that was called Heart Space. And I wanted to blend the art and the science of human connection. So here's the thing. There is scientific evidence that the human heart emits a radiomagnetic field somewhere between 4 to 6 feet around us. And when human beings are in close proximity, you actually can feel, you actually share that energy, right? And by the way, I'm not in Seattle. It's not a West Coast kind of birthday, right? It really is scientific. And we actually hired these people who you put your hands on a metal orb, and it actually visualized this energy onto a screen. And the idea that we had was that we would create a heart space photo booth where you would be able to go in and actually be with 2 or 3 of your friends and actually visualize how your heartbeat was interchanging with the people that were close to you.
That's so cool.
So one of the reasons that face-to-face works is because when look at it, Chinese culture about food and gathering together, right? There's real scientific evidence about why that is true, because there's something physical that actually happens when we're together.
No, I believe you.
We're sharing heart energy. Well, yeah. In fact, there was the big one, right? In the heart. No, it was this one, right?
Oh, this one.
This one.
We should end today's talk later on with this, and we take a photo.
Yeah.
So for all the participants, it's very rare to get Matthew in such, direct conversation with us all. So if you have questions, please start putting them in the chat room. I see one. I just have one more question, then we'll move on to pick questions from the audience.
Sure.
This one question I have, because Matthew is at the top of luxury travel around the world. So he's in daily conversation with the best of the best of the best. And obviously pandemic has been very hard for the industry, for everybody around the globe. And us in China were somewhat a little bit more fortunate last year, but it's still tough. We're not out of it yet. Maybe you can inspire us. Give us 3 of the best examples that you've seen in people dealing with COVID successfully from the industry that we can learn something from.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this the other day, and it's interesting. I think, first of all, the one thing that I have to say, sometimes you forget the obvious, but one of the things that actually happened in COVID, over the years, we've always said that every time there's some sort of a big disruption, people that have really good travel advisors, the reputation of the advisor goes up, right? Because of the way that they were able to help the client. So to me, I want to state the obvious. When everything started to shut down, the collaboration between travel advisors and Virtuoso travel partners to help the clients come home, be okay, do all those things, that created a tremendous amount of loyalty, right? That was something that, and that happened over a period of it took about almost 2 months, when all the different countries were going and all the repatriation and all that. So I think that's really important. I think another thing that was really that I started seeing that was very good is that people really embraced that transparency to a whole nother level, right? They worked with their partners. They worked on the cancellations, the rebookings, and all this thing in a very transparent way. And I think that was very important. And then from that, I think that obviously everybody did what they needed to do from the processes of managing their expenses and all that, but it was the outreach, right? And I think that framing the conversation around the concept that travel has 3 payoffs. One of them is the idea of dreaming, right? The planning.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's the joy of the experience itself and the power of memories. So I think one of the things that we saw is that we framed the fact that travel isn't just travel itself. It's the dreaming, it's the doing, and it's the remembering. And it's super interesting to find out that, when it's the exact opposite, that when you buy a fancy car or a fancy purse or whatever, travel is the exact opposite of what happens. When you buy something, a good, human beings adapt to it, you get very used to it. And then it's like, I want the next best thing, right? But what's really interesting about travel is the further you get away from a travel experience, the stronger the memory is, the more joy it actually becomes stronger as you go further away from it, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. So I think the other thing that I thought was really well done is that we provided that framework, but the creativity around ensuring that clients, looked at travel through that lens, and therefore executed marketing and events and all kinds of things, and all the different variations of virtual, right? Virtual trips, virtual this, cooking classes, things with the kids and things like that. So that's an example. And then I think collaboration is the other thing that I would say. We were talking earlier about the collaboration, and I think collaboration amongst members, collaboration amongst people in an office, collaboration amongst partners and members that was also that's been a big move, a big part of what I saw happening.
Yeah. Let me. I do want to translate some of what you just said because it's important. 我刚才问的这个问题，我就说，在这个 COVID 期间，他看到过一些，就这个行业里头，大家都做了一些什么事情来应对这 COVID 疫情，来生存下去。他就觉得最感动的就是几个方面，一个是这些在旅行行业的人，越是遇到危机的时候，特别是他把客户放在第一位的这些人，他的名声经过危机以后会越来越好。这个就是 I wanted to say, like, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going is very true with the Virtuoso advisors. 就是情况越糟糕的时候，他的这些最杰出的这些公司、最杰出的这些人的名声会越来越好，因为他们在这个时候会想到怎么样去照顾他的客人，大家去彼此帮助呀，去做这些事情，这是一个。还有一个呢，那这个旅行本身跟买我们的高级的包或者是高级的车买东西完全不一样，因为他买的是一体验。所以呢，买旅行的时候呢，它其实是有3个部分，一个部分是你做梦开始规划的时候，种草的时候，对吧？第2部分呢是你实际去了以后体验的，第3个部分是你后来的记忆。所以呢，这是最值得的投资，因为旅行完了以后，这个记忆越久越值钱，就像红酒一样的，而不是你的包你买回来提1个月，习惯了没有什么意义了，对吧？所以呢，在这段时间里头呢，其实大家对这个旅行的记忆是越来越美好的，以后在 rebound 的时候会更好，对不对？第3一个呢，就是人和人之间的建立连接和互助，不管是同事之间也好，同行之间也好，甚至竞争对手之间的这种互助和连接呢，是他在这疫情当中看到的做的最好的。I think that's really well said. Thank you, Matthew. I see a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One of them is from Jenny Liang. We're a China experience-based tour operator in China. Would love to become a part of Virtuoso network. How would you recommend we get started?
Well, we have an application process, so you can just basically, as you said earlier, it's also by referrals, right? So you can send an email to, you can send one to me and I can forward it. Upchurch@virtuoso.com.
Oh my God! 大家 write down this email. This is the perk.
I will forward it. I will forward it to the right group.
Irene, would you mind helping us type it in there? This is the benefit. This is the bonus points for attending live.
Really surprised, but and thank you. I actually sent an email to a message to Jenny already. So actually forward to asia@virtuoso.com if you have any questions regarding the network, trying to understand, trying to become one of our agency, feel free just to send to.
And you can say it in Chinese if you want, Irene.
对，我刚刚有就是发私信给 Jenny 了，就如果说你们对 Virtuoso 的 network 有兴趣的话，可以写邮件到 asia@virtuoso.com， 所以就是亚洲的那个邮箱，然后我们会有专人跟你们回复，谢谢。
Irene's protective of your time, Matthew. You are lucky to have such wonderful staff who are always watching your back, right? Okay. The next question is from Sabrina. I'm curious what technology you used to make meetings for 6,500 people.
We actually developed. There wasn't one. We actually developed it ourselves many years ago, and then we kept developing it. So yeah, because we have the 4-minute appointments, which we call the speed dating. And by the way, I started the speed dating when I was in my early 20s, so that was like late 80s. So that technology has developed over the years, and it's and there's a whole technique to it. So it's homegrown.
Yeah, proprietary. Okay. 大家没有别的问题了吗？没有别的问题，那我要折过去问他的问题了。Okay. While others are coming up with questions, I will ask the $1 million question.
Yeah.
When do you think cross-border travel will restart?
I think what's going to happen is we're going to see. I'm looking. Most everybody is looking at somehow in the northern hemisphere. I think there's going to be some small pockets and corridors around the world, probably by late spring, early summer, and then I think summer and into the fall, we'll hopefully see more as vaccination. As you know, China, of course, is already ahead of us all with COVID health passports, for example. You already have that.
The green code.
So, and so I think we're mostly expecting real international travel to probably start coming back sort of in the later half of the year. But again, it's going to be, you're going to see what we've been seeing, which is these corridors, these corridors of destinations opening up, right? Where there's a kind of bilateral. I think that's going to be the most likely. But it also depends on how fast this the vaccination regime and the protocols and the other thing that we're all really wanting and everybody's pushing for with world organizations is better coordination. I mean, just on the COVID passports alone, there's the IATA one, there's the Common Pass one out of Switzerland, there's the World Economic Forum one, there's whatever. So one of the more important things is how do we make sure that there's interoperability with all these things, right?
Yeah.
So, but let's remember that, let's remember that 197 million people lost their jobs in 2020 in travel and tourism.
170 million.
197 million.
197 million people in travel industry.
Right, and that's direct and indirect.
Remember that number. It's incredible.
It's crazy.
So on survival, many of our colleagues in China have undergone extreme hardship, to be honest. And I'll get to that question in a second. I just have this one on pivoting your businesses. Many of us who are working on inbound into China businesses have pivoted to serve domestic Chinese market. What advice do you have for these people? Because it takes actually extra investment for product development, system building, serving the expat market or domestic market. Should we plan on a long-term strategic shift or just a temporary coping?
Well, here's the thing. I think it goes back to this whole thing about, I think it also goes back to like, what business are we in, right? So there's nothing wrong. I mean, it's funny because I myself am a victim of somebody that's, I've been in this industry for so many years. I've been to Zimbabwe 7 times. I still have not been to South Carolina, where my father was born. So I'm a little bit like a lot of people in this industry sometimes, that I knew more about somewhere far away than I did somewhere nearby. But I do think that I think the shift moving forward is not, because as technology, as virtual technology, as all kinds of things, whatever, it's really about the way in which we present the product and the way in which we handle the client, whether it's domestic or whatever. It's about those connections, those people, the creativity, of the way we put together these programs that I think really matters. As technology becomes more and more, because technology is only going to get better about making it feel like people think that they already know everything there is to know, right? When in fact, that's where we have to keep coming back to. Yes, you may know. And one thing, by the way, one other thing I wanted to share was a quote from years ago. And I said, a lot of and this might be good for a translation one, but in a world where people can access so much information, what stresses the customer isn't whether they can find an answer. What stresses the customer is always wondering if they didn't ask the one question they should have asked.
wondering if they should ask the question. Okay, I'll give it a try. This is not even quite complete. 他就是这个 quote Matthew 有很多 quote， 你们会发现他说话就是金句连篇的。他说其实让一个客人真正就觉得这压力最大的时候，不是说他能不能找着什么东西的答案，而是他担心有没有问对问题，有没有漏掉什么该问的问题没有问。想想这一句话，不是怕他找不到答案，因为答案整个网上互联网上多的是信息时代，信息充斥，但是真正一个人最担心的是他忘了问他应该问的问题。And expand on that. How does that apply to a travel advisor?
Well, I tell you what I've learned over the years, where you get a lot of times when you really get the attention of a client is not because you told them all this stuff that they can look up. Sometimes, but it's when you ask really good questions. So when you ask, and so over the years, I've seen people, first there's overall questions that you can just ask of the client that makes them think, right? Well, nobody asked me that, or I don't normally think about that. Or so asking really good questions. And then over time, you also start thinking of the right questions for certain types of travel. Like, what are the best questions when you're thinking about a safari? Or what are the best questions when you're thinking about multi-generational travel or things like that? And those are things that advisors should practice, right, with each other and whatever. It's a practice thing. A lot of times we think that our authority and that our value is because we're just going to spew out all these answers and all these facts and all these information. But it's the thoughtful questions that a lot of times really make a customer appreciate you.
Absolutely. 我觉得差不多在这一句话上，我们今天的金句就拿到了。他说，其实我就问他刚才他说的这句话，对你做一个这个旅行定制师来讲有什么用呢？你有没有发现你跟客户一大堆信息？这个我经常看见我们同事做，发那个微信里面连篇的这个酒店在这儿什么什么发了一大篇，人根本没记住。也没看见，回头照样出问题。出了问题以后，他说我给他这信息了，人家没听到，对吧？你什么时候客人会多听你一句话，多看你一眼的？是你问了一个非常聪明的问题，你问了一个他没有想到的问题，你让他开始对这个事情。那这个问题，这不是有一个固定的模式的哈，大家要慢慢的在自己的工作当中来总结，在同事之间可以练习。所以，所有躲在屏幕后面、躲在微信后面，只给客人发信息的人，要真的想做好旅行定制是很难的。你必须要走到客人面前去，问你该问的问题。I think that is the golden nugget of the session. Give us one more gold nugget, then we'll let you go to bed. I know it's very late. Thank you, Matthew. The one last thing is I want a recommendation of a book from you that has influenced your way of looking at the world.
My favorite book, because the author has also become a dear friend, but he's one of the most thoughtful thinkers, is a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek. So his S-I-M-O-N is the first name, and S-I-N-E-K is the last name. And
he the speaker in the opening show?
Yeah, that was him.
Yeah, okay.
So that was a video of him the first time he spoke in 2010. But he wrote a book called Start With Why.
Yep.
And the basic premise of Start With Why is people buy the why and they commoditize the what. So if you're a travel advisor, realize that ultimately, as you evolve your career, people buy who you are. That's why it's very closely correlated to what I just said about asking questions, right? right? Because it's otherwise I'm just in a competition with a client about who's going to access more information, right? And to your point about, you know, a lot of travel agents in different parts of the world did not become travel advisors overnight. So I don't want you to have this perspective. You're going to have those people that book this for me, do this for me, whatever. But as you develop a relationship and you start asking questions, you start being able to do that. So Start With Why is a very powerful book. And it's also a very short TED speech.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Please take note. I think this summarizes like the way we work, the way the future is.
Right.
While we work with all the computer technologies, we don't fight. We use them to help us tell a better why story, right? Thank you so much, Matthew. This is incredibly insightful, and you just demonstrated what you said. During times of difficulty, during COVID, this is how we support each other to get stronger and get better.
Well, and by the way, I'll leave you with one thing. Again, I talked about the whole thing about technology. One of the most best highlights of 2019 was when I was in Shanghai with Irene, and we had met with a company that was helping us set up our licenses and all those kinds of things, right? And it was very interesting because when I was in my 20s and I started this business, there were two things that I loved. I loved travel and I loved entrepreneurs, right? And one of the whole ideas behind Virtuoso was, how can we do something together that we can't do alone? And the idea that there's more to be gained by sharing than there is by keeping to ourselves.
Absolutely.
And when we were in this office with this company, who obviously had just learned about us, they were telling us about one of our employees that was coming to China, and it said travel, travel, travel. And he says, you need to remove all this information about travel from your CV. And I said, why? Because they said, the company said, well, you're not in the travel business. I said, what do you mean I'm not in the travel business? He says, do you handle a traveler? I said, no, Virtuoso doesn't handle a traveler. He said, well, then you're not in the travel business. And I said, okay, so what business are you in? And this was what I loved. They said, we're going to present you to the Chinese government, not as a foreign company that's coming here to compete, but as a company who's coming to China to help our entrepreneurs be more successful in the world. And for me, that was such a joy, because it literally connected to what I've been trying to do with my life for the last 30 years of my life, right? Mm-hmm. And what I love about it is the idea that, you know, one of the reasons that big technology companies want to be dominant is because they can, because it's possible. Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about human connection business, it's not possible, because no one person can handle everybody like a computer can. So when when people who want to be in this side of the business can come together and share, then we're stronger for it, whether we're internally in China or around the world connected. And there is a market segment of human connection that because in a world where there's more and more technology, the thing that will be rare, the thing that will be craved is authentic human connection.
Absolutely. 刚才他讲的这一个，我觉得也有必要稍微翻一下吧。在现在所有的事情，大家都说我们都是用电脑来做的时候，更多的人其实更期望、更需要这种人和人的连接。那我们选择了做这个人的生意，就是选择了愿意接受这种小规模。确实是因为我们是人和人之间的关系，我们没有办法做到一个人可能为2万个人服务的模式，对吧？但是呢，我们有能够抱在一起，小，但是能够抱团儿，就能够做得更好。Yeah, that is very well said. Thank you. I see one question which is intriguing, so I'm tempted to expand already 7 minutes beyond. Can you take this one question?
Sure.
is on the failure of Thomas Cook. What do you think of that? And how do you see the future of a platform-based travel company versus what we talked about?
Well, I mean, you know, if you look back on that, you know, that was a story of leverage. I mean, so that could happen in any, you know, so I think that if you look at that, that was as much a story about private equity putting massive amounts of leverage on a company, right? So that can happen. So I don't think it was just a travel thing, but I actually do think that you know, I'll also answer this question with a broader picture. Every industry in the world, not just travel, every industry in the world is polarizing between optimized commodity players and optimized experiential. And experiential is also where you find the bespoke, the custom, the personal, right?
Yeah.
The beauty of what I do like, and one of the reasons that I feel that there's such good potential is the really big companies. There's always going to, you know, in the commodity space, there's always going to be kind of the top two, the top three, the top whatever, because that's the commodity play. In the experiential side, you have a lot more opportunity for different size businesses, but also because there's enabling technologies today, right? That enable us to do things that we wouldn't do before.
Yeah.
So I think so for me, my passion, my love, my whatever has always been that there's always this opportunity, you know, to be in the human connection business. And since you already lent in it, there's one other question that was in there about being an industry leader. You know, the way I would answer that is, it's not about being a leader. It's about, I think the way you get labeled a leader over a number of years.
No, you earned it.
Is because you listened and you basically tried to figure out how to bring people together to solve things, right? Because that's what leading is about, serving, right? Leading is about trying to bring people together and do things together that we can't do alone. So that's my definition of it.
Absolutely love everything you said, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank
you. I think it resonated with me personally to all the other conversations we've had, even about parenting, about leadership, about partnership, about experiences. I'm teaching a course on experience creation, and what you said could be an opening session in the entire course. That is the mindset. We're all in this business of creating human connection, and let's make that meaningful. And thank you so much, Matthew, for taking the time. And thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh, wait.
I need to take a photo of that. With your like this.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah, I think I got it. I think I got it. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Good night. Bye-bye. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Irene. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Irene. Bye.